The blade rises with the morning sun over Bamberg like a tooth bared to the sky. On May 1, 1573, a 19-year-old named Franz Schmidt steps into the square, not meek, not apologetic, but like a predator walking back into his territory. Before him a thief kneels, bound and shaking, the crowd's eyes slick with a mixture of hunger and relief. Franz doesn't fumble. He lifts the sword with a calm that's almost cruel, every motion precise, practiced, inevitable. In that single swing the boy becomes a machine of law, cold, efficient, and merciless. That strike is the first in a career that will tally 394 deaths like a ledger of prey. Franz is not born a butcher, he is bred for it. Heinrich Schmidt, his father, was plucked from the woods by the Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach and forced into the trade, a sentence that turned a name into a brand of isolation. The Schmidt name becomes a scarlet letter that repels neighbors, bars children from guilds and pews, and shoves entire families to the margins. But where others recoil, Franz leans in. He wears the exile like armor and shapes the stigma into power. Under his father's hand in Hof he learns the rites of ending, the nooses choke, the blade's arc, the staged humiliation that feeds the public appetite. He studies timing, spectacle, the precise choreography that extracts fear and forces confession. He watches how crowds tilt from curiosity to carnivorous fervor, and he learns to feed them exactly what they need. Execution, for him, is not mere duty, it is predation dressed as justice. Bamberg becomes his hunting ground. The city council writes the transaction in sterile ink, the executioner Franz Schmidt is paid for the sentence carried out, but the ledger cannot capture the hunt that plays out beneath it. Each entry in his meticulous diary is a claim staked, dates, names, the angle of the blade, the reaction of the condemned. On May 1, 1573, I wielded the sword for the first time, in Bamberg. He notes with the same flatness one might use to record rent. The words are a trophy and a promise. He doesn't simply obey the law, he courts it. He studies the weaknesses of statutes, the rhythms of municipal justice, the tastes of magistrates and mobs. He becomes desirable because he is predictable and precise in the worst way, a man who can convert guilt into spectacle and spectacle into order. Towns that want their verdicts delivered cleanly and publicly seek him out, authorities who want sentences executed without fumble or scandal send for Schmidt like one might send for a hound. Franz Schmidt's reign as an executioner is remembered not only for its length but for the sheer brutality of the punishments he carried out. His diary, preserved through time, reveals a grim tally, 394 executions and more than 350 corporal punishments over his 45 years of service. The most common of his duties was beheading by sword. Nobles, soldiers, and criminals of higher standing often received this so-called merciful death. Schmidt's skill made him feared and respected, one swift stroke, the head falling cleanly, leaving behind a silent crowd. But for peasants and those deemed unworthy, mercy was rarely offered. Hanging remained the punishment for thieves, vagrants, and repeat offenders. The condemned were placed before the crowd, the rope slipped around their necks, and the drop ended their struggles, if done cleanly. When poorly executed, death could drag on in suffocating agony, and Schmidt was there to ensure the sentence was fulfilled, no matter how long the suffering lasted. For crimes considered monstrous, parricide, multiple murders, or extreme violence, Schmidt wielded the most terrifying instrument of medieval justice, the breaking wheel. The condemned was strapped to a wooden wheel, and with a heavy iron bar, their limbs were shattered joint by joint. Sometimes the executioner left them alive, broken and twisted, their cries filling the air as hours passed before death finally claimed them. To the spectators, this was justice served. To Schmidt, it was another tally in his record. Woman accused of infanticide faced a particular fate. Many were drowned, tied to a sack and lowered beneath the water, their deaths presented as cleansing for their crime. Others were beheaded in the square, their final moments witnessed by a silent crowd. For witchcraft, arson, and heresy, the punishment was fire. Schmidt presided over burnings, where the condemned were tied to stakes, the flames rising until screams turned to silence. This was justice as both punishment and public warning, meant to burn into memory as much as into flesh. Beyond executions, Schmidt also carried out corporal punishments. Criminals were flogged, mutilated, branded with hot irons, or had ears and fingers cut off. These acts of pain were designed to mark their bodies permanently, a living testimony to their crime. Each method was not only a punishment but a performance, reinforcing the iron grip of law and faith on medieval society. For Schmidt, it was duty, precise, calculated, and relentless. And yet, as his diary shows, every life taken was carefully noted, as though he understood that history would one day judge both the condemned and the man who carried out their sentence. Among the hundreds of deaths Franz Schmidt recorded, some stand out for their sheer cruelty and the chilling glimpse they give into medieval justice. His diary does not glorify these acts, it catalogues them with the cold precision of a man who saw death as routine. Yet behind each entry lies a spectacle of brutality that shocked even the hardened crowds of Nuremberg. One of the most infamous punishments was the breaking wheel, reserved for the worst of crimes. In one case, Schmidt executed a man convicted of murdering his own parents, a crime that horrified the community. The condemned was laid out on the wheel, his arms and legs shattered by iron blows until his body twisted into unnatural shapes. He was left alive, his screams echoing across the square as the crowd watched him slowly die. For hours, he lingered, broken and bleeding, until death finally claimed him. This was not just execution, it was torture designed to brand terror into the memory of every witness. Women accused of infanticide were frequent victims of Schmidt's blade. In one entry, he notes the beheading of a young mother who had killed her newborn. She was executed swiftly, yet the stigma of her crime meant the death was treated not as justice for one life lost, but as a warning to all women in the crowd. In other cases, the punishment was drowning, women tied in sacks and lowered beneath the water until their struggles ceased. Such deaths were viewed as purification, though they were nothing more than brutal spectacles. Schmidt also presided over the burnings of alleged witches and arsonists. Fire was considered the only fitting punishment for those accused of bringing the devil's hand into the world. In one case, a man guilty of repeated arson was chained to the stake, the flames rising as he cried out for mercy. The crowd did not look away, they leaned closer, as if watching evil itself be consumed by fire. Theft, though a lesser crime, could also lead to gruesome deaths. Highwaymen and repeat offenders were hanged in public squares, their bodies sometimes left to rot on display as a warning to travelers. Schmidt also carried out mutilations, cutting off ears, branding faces, or amputating fingers, turning criminals into living monuments of shame. His diary reveals over and over how different punishments were applied depending on class. Nobles might be granted a swift and honorable death by sword, while peasants suffered on wheels, gallows, or in flames. Justice in his world was not equal, it was steeped in hierarchy and spectacle. Each of these executions, preserved in his writings, reminds us that Schmidt's career was not built on anonymous deaths but on highly visible, unforgettable moments of public suffering. He was not merely a functionary of law, he was the face of terror, the man who delivered judgment with iron and fire before the eyes of an entire society.